The first encounter. Dr. Marcus Clark adjusted his crisp white coat as he stepped into the lecture hall of the Galactic Research Vessel. The room was a marvel of alien technology, its walls shimmering with colors that danced like liquid light. Around him sat a dozen alien scholars, their eyes, or what passed for eyes, fixed on the human professor. Each species represented in the room came from a different corner of the galaxy, their curiosity about Earth and its people bringing them here. Among them sat Solara, a young Ex-Kira female with shimmering blue skin and large, glowing eyes. Her species was known for their intelligence and sharp tongues, and Solara was no exception. From the moment Marcus had begun his lectures on human biology, she had made her opinion clear. Humans were primitive, inefficient, and, above all, amusing. Today's topic was human reproduction. Marcus knew it was a subject that often drew smirks and scoffs from his alien students, but he was determined to approach it with professionalism. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice steady. "Today, we'll discuss a process that is fundamental to human survival and evolution: reproduction." Zolara's lips curled into a smirk, her sharp teeth flashing briefly. Marcus noticed but pressed on, ignoring the flicker of doubt in his mind. He tapped a button on his holopad, and a 3D projection of the human reproductive system appeared in the center of the room, spinning slowly. The murmurs began immediately. "As you can see," Marcus said, gesturing to the hologram, "the human reproductive system is complex, but remarkably efficient for our species." Zolara's laughter broke the silence. It was a melodic sound, like chimes in the wind, but it carried an unmistakable edge of mockery. The other students turned toward her, some chuckling nervously. "Efficient," Zolara said, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You call that efficient? Your species carries offspring for 9 of your Earth months, endures pain to bring them into the world, and then spends years raising them. Inefficient is an understatement." Marcus felt his cheeks flush, but he kept his composure. He had encountered skepticism before, though Zolara's ridicule felt sharper than most. "It may seem inefficient from your perspective, Zolara," he replied calmly. "But our method ensures strong bonds between parents and children, creating a foundation for cooperation and survival." Zolara leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "Bonds? You mean emotional attachments, weaknesses that distract you in critical moments. My species abandoned such primitive methods eons ago." The room fell silent. Marcus knew he had to respond, but he also knew he couldn't win this debate with data alone. Zolara wasn't just questioning biology. She was challenging the essence of humanity itself. Marcus stepped closer to the projection, turning it off with a swipe. The room dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the walls and the faint hum of alien technology. "Zolara," Marcus said, his voice quieter but firm, "do you know why humans survived on Earth, despite being physically weaker than many of the predators that hunted us?" She tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Luck, perhaps." "No," Marcus said. "It was our ability to form connections, to care for one another, and to ensure the survival of our offspring at all costs. That bond you call a weakness is what allowed us to thrive." Zolara's smirk didn't waver. "So you claim. But how does enduring pain and inefficiency make your species superior? Other species reproduce with far less effort." Marcus smiled slightly, sensing an opportunity. "Then perhaps it's time I show you something beyond charts and data. Meet me after class. I'll show you why human reproduction isn't just biology. It's the core of who we are." Zolara's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. She didn't reply, but her glowing eyes followed him as he turned back to address the rest of the class. The lecture ended, and the students dispersed, their various forms and appendages moving fluidly out of the hall. Zolara lingered, her glowing eyes fixed on Marcus. "You really believe you can change my perspective?" she asked, her tone challenging, but less mocking than before. "I do," Marcus replied, meeting her gaze. Because understanding humanity isn't just about biology. It's about heart. Zilara tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Very well, human. Impress me. Marcus nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. He didn't just want to prove Zilara wrong. He wanted to show her the beauty of humanity's struggle and the strength born from their so-called inefficiencies. As she left the room, her laughter echoed faintly in the corridor, but this time it seemed less mocking and more intrigued. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The first encounter had been rocky, but the real challenge, and the real story, was just beginning. The challenge begins. Zilara's metallic blue fingers tapped rhythmically on the smooth surface of the observation deck. The galactic research vessel floated in the vast blackness of space, its massive hull illuminated by the light of distant stars. Below her, the endless void stretched in every direction, a reminder of the insignificance of most life forms, humans included, she thought with a smirk. She had never been one to dwell on lesser species. The ex-Kiro were a race of logic, efficiency, and unparalleled technological mastery. Their reproductive methods were clean, precise, and devoid of what they considered emotional noise. Watching humans muddle through their archaic processes was like observing a primitive art form. Crude, messy, and utterly pointless. Still, there was something about the human, Dr. Marcus Clark, that Zilara found intriguing. He wasn't like the other humans she had encountered, timid diplomats or boastful soldiers. He seemed determined, perhaps even stubborn, in a way that she didn't yet understand. Her musings were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Marcus appeared at the entrance to the deck, holding a small holopad. His expression was calm, but there was an intensity in his gaze that caught her attention. "You actually came," Zilara remarked, not turning to face him fully. "I half expected you to run back to your quarters, licking your wounds." Marcus chuckled softly. "You underestimate humans, Zilara. That's your first mistake." She finally turned, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied him. "And your first mistake is believing you can convince me of anything. But I'll admit, your persistence is unusual. What do you have for me, Professor?" Marcus stepped closer, holding up the holopad. "A challenge." Zilara raised a brow, curiosity flickering across her face. "A challenge?" "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "You believe human reproduction is inefficient, primitive, even laughable. Fine. But I believe you're looking at it through a limited lens. So I challenge you to let me show you what you're missing." She crossed her arms, leaning back against the railing. "And if you fail?" Marcus smirked. "Then you get to mock me in front of the entire class. Publicly, loudly. I'll even record it for your amusement." Zilara's lips curled into a smile. "And if you succeed?" Marcus paused, holding her gaze. "Then you admit that there's more to human reproduction than biology, that there's strength in our way of life." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Zilara's mind raced. Part of her wanted to dismiss the challenge outright. It wasn't as if this human could truly change her perspective. But another part, the part that thrived on intellectual battles, couldn't resist the opportunity to test him. "Very well," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. "I accept your challenge, human, but don't expect me to go easy on you." Marcus nodded, as though he had expected nothing less. "Meet me tomorrow in the simulation chamber. I'll show you something that might surprise you." Zilara tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. "Surprise me? Highly unlikely. But I'll humor you." As Marcus turned to leave, Zilara called after him. "Dr. Clark." He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Yes. I admire your confidence," she said, her tone carrying the faintest hint of sincerity. "Even if it's entirely misplaced." Marcus smiled. "Confidence isn't misplaced when it's backed by truth. See you tomorrow." Zilara watched him disappear down the corridor, her mind a whirl of questions and curiosity. For the first time, she found herself genuinely intrigued by a human, not just their flaws, but the possibility that there was something deeper beneath their inefficiency. Whatever Marcus had planned, she decided, she would be ready. After all, the game had just begun. A scientific demonstration. The simulation chamber hummed softly, its walls alive with faint currents of glowing energy. Zilara stood at the center of the room, her arms crossed as she examined the array of equipment Marcus had brought with him. Beside him, a towering console displayed a swirling holographic representation of Earth, its lush greens and blues starkly different from the stark metal of the galactic research vessel. Marcus was busy adjusting the holopad in his hand, a look of quiet focus on his face. Zilara watched him, curiosity warring with her usual skepticism. What could this human possibly show her that would be different from the dull lectures and data he'd already provided? Impressive toys, Zilara remarked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Are these supposed to distract me from the inefficiency of your species? Marcus glanced up, smirking. These toys are about to take you on a journey through human existence. Think you can handle it? Her glowing eyes narrowed. I've seen entire galaxies rise and fall. I doubt your primitive Earth has much to offer. Without replying, Marcus tapped a command into his holopad. Instantly, the room transformed. The walls dissolved into an expansive savanna, the air shimmering with the heat of an Earth-like sun. The sound of rustling grass and distant animal calls filled the chamber. Zilara tilted her head, momentarily impressed by the realism of the simulation. In the distance, a group of early humans appeared, their figures silhouetted against the horizon. They'd moved in a tight-knit group, carrying crude tools and watching their surroundings with wary eyes. These are our ancestors, Marcus explained. Homo habilis. They weren't the strongest species on Earth, nor the fastest. But they survived because they learned to work together, to protect their young, and to pass knowledge to the next generation. The scene shifted, morphing into a frozen tundra. Another group of humans appeared, bundled in furs and huddled around a fire. One of them cradled a child in their arms, their faces etched with determination. Through ice ages and predators, humanity endured, Marcus continued. Not because we were perfect, but because we were connected. Each generation built upon the sacrifices of the one before. Zilara watched silently, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus raised a hand to stop her. Wait, he said, tapping his holopad again. The simulation changed once more, this time to a bustling medieval village. Children ran through the streets, parents worked side by side, and families gathered around tables for meals. This is where human reproduction becomes more than biology, Marcus said. It's not just about creating offspring. It's about building something bigger than ourselves. Communities, societies, civilizations. Zilara finally spoke, her voice sharp. Communities built on emotional dependence. And what happens when those bonds are broken? War, chaos, death. Your species has paid a high price for its so-called strength. Marcus met her gaze, unfazed. You're right. We've made mistakes, terrible ones. But even in war and chaos, those bonds bring us back from the edge. Let me show you. Before she could respond, the simulation shifted again. Now, the chamber was filled with the sounds of explosions and cries. A city lay in ruins, its buildings reduced to rubble. In the midst of the devastation, a human mother pulled her child from the wreckage, holding them close despite the danger around her. This is what you don't see, Zilara, Marcus said, his voice softer. The strength it takes to care for another, even when everything is falling apart. That's what makes us human. For a moment, Zilara said nothing. Her glowing eyes flickered, her sharp mind processing the images and the emotions behind them. She couldn't deny the raw intensity of what she was seeing, even if it conflicted with her own logical beliefs. Finally, she broke the silence. So, your argument is that humans thrive on chaos and suffering. Marcus shook his head. No, my argument is that we thrive despite it, And that strength comes from the very bonds you've dismissed as weaknesses. The room returned to its original state, the glowing walls of the simulation chamber reappearing. Zilara stood still, her expression thoughtful. For the first time, Marcus saw no trace of mockery in her gaze. "You're persistent, Dr. Clark," she said at last. "I'll give you that. But persistence doesn't equal proof." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll have to show you more." Zilara smirked, though it lacked her usual sharpness. "Very well. But don't expect me to admit defeat just yet." As Marcus packed up his equipment, Zilara turned to leave. Her steps were as graceful as ever, but her mind was far from settled. For the first time, she wondered if there might be more to humans than she had given them credit for. Perhaps this challenge was more than a game after all. The turning point. The quiet hum of the galactic research vessel's library was a stark contrast to the lively debates Marcus and Zilara had shared in the simulation chamber. Here, the air felt heavier, almost sacred, as if the collected knowledge of countless species demanded silence. Rows upon rows of glowing data panels stretched endlessly, each containing the collective history of civilizations long gone and those still thriving. Marcus sat at a central table, a small holographic projector in front of him. He wasn't presenting this time. Instead, he was showing something deeply personal, something no charts, simulations, or data could replicate. Zilara entered with her usual confidence, her glowing eyes scanning the room until they landed on him. She approached, her expression neutral but her curiosity unmistakable. "No simulations today?" she asked, folding her arms. "I was beginning to think that was your only strategy." Marcus looked up and smiled. "No simulations. Today, I want to tell you a story." Zilara tilted her head, intrigued but skeptical. "A story? And you think that will convince me of the so-called strength of human reproduction?" "I'm not trying to convince you," Marcus said, gesturing for her to sit. "I just want you to understand." Reluctantly, Zilara took a seat across from him. "Very well. Amaze me, human." Marcus activated the holographic projector. The image of a modest Earth home appeared, a small, cozy structure surrounded by trees and a garden in full bloom. The scene felt warm, even through the projection, and Zilara's sharp features softened slightly as she studied it. "This was my grandparents' house," Marcus began. "They built it together after the Second Global War on Earth. My grandfather, Robert, had survived the front lines. My grandmother, Elise, had worked tirelessly in the cities, keeping the community alive." The projection shifted, showing a grainy recording of an elderly couple sitting on a porch. They were laughing, their hands intertwined as they shared a quiet moment. "They didn't just survive the war, they built a life," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "They raised 3 children, my father being one of them. And through them, they passed down values of resilience, love, and hope." Zilara's glowing eyes flickered as she watched the recording. "And what does this have to do with reproduction?" Marcus met her gaze. "Everything. Without their bond, without their willingness to endure pain and hardship together, I wouldn't exist. None of their children would. Humanity's strength isn't in efficiency. It's in enduring for the sake of others." Zilara leaned back, her expression unreadable. "So, you're saying your existence is their victory?" Marcus smiled faintly. "In a way, yes. But it's more than that. It's about the connections they forged and the legacy they left behind. Those bonds ripple outward, shaping the future in ways we can't always see." The hologram changed again, this time showing a young family gathered around a hospital bed. A newborn baby lay in the arms of a tired but smiling mother. Marcus's voice softened as he explained. "That's my niece, Sophie, on the day she was born. I remember holding her for the first time and realizing how fragile and precious life is. It wasn't just biology. It was something more, something worth protecting, no matter the cost." Zilara's gaze lingered on the image. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Finally, she said, Your people invest so much emotion into this process. It seems dangerous. What happens when it fails? When those bonds are broken? Marcus nodded, as if expecting the question. It hurts, sometimes deeply. But even in loss, those bonds give us strength to move forward, to heal, to keep trying. The library fell silent again, the weight of his words settling between them. Zilara's usual smirk was absent, replaced by a thoughtful expression. She tapped her fingers lightly on the table, processing what she had seen and heard. "Your species is strange, Marcus," she said finally. "You build your lives on something intangible, something that can't be quantified or guaranteed. And yet, it seems to work. It's not perfect," Marcus admitted, "but it's ours, and it's why we've survived." Zilara stood slowly, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Your story is compelling, I'll admit that, but I still think your methods are inefficient." Marcus chuckled, rising to his feet. "Efficiency isn't everything, Zilara. Sometimes it's the messy, imperfect parts that make life worth living." She didn't reply, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her steps slower than usual. As Marcus watched her leave, he couldn't help but feel a small spark of hope. For the first time, it seemed like she wasn't just dismissing him outright. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to reach her. A field trip to Earth, virtually. The simulation chamber was unlike anything Zilara had seen before. This time, Marcus had transformed the space into a portal to Earth, not through dry data or sterile projections, but through something alive and immersive. The walls shimmered with the hues of a sunrise, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers and damp soil. Zilara stepped inside, her glowing eyes narrowing as she scanned her surroundings. "This is Earth?" she asked, her tone skeptical. "It's smaller than I imagined." Marcus stood nearby, a sly smile on his face. "This is just a piece of it. Think of it as a window into our world. Let's start with something simple." He gestured toward the horizon, and the scene shifted. Suddenly, they were standing in a bustling Earth marketplace. Humans moved through the crowd, their voices rising and falling in a symphony of life. A mother balanced a toddler on her hip while haggling with a vendor. Nearby, an elderly couple held hands as they examined fresh produce. Children ran through the crowd, laughing and playing. Zilara tilted her head, watching the scene unfold. "What am I supposed to learn from this chaos?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Marcus stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the bustling crowd. "This isn't chaos. It's connection. Every person here is part of a larger web. Families, friendships, communities, all built on bonds that are formed through reproduction and nurtured over time." Zilara folded her arms. "And yet, I see inefficiency everywhere. The mother with the child, slowed by her attachment. The elderly couple, frail and vulnerable. Your species clings to weakness." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he tapped his holopad, and the scene shifted again. This time, they were standing in a small, dimly lit hospital room. A woman lay in a bed, cradling a newborn in her arms. The father sat beside her, his face a mixture of exhaustion and awe. Nearby, a nurse adjusted the monitors, her expression warm. "Look closely," Marcus said softly. Zilara hesitated but stepped closer. Her glowing eyes studied the scene in silence. The woman's face radiated joy despite her obvious fatigue. The father's hand rested protectively on the baby, his expression one of profound wonder. "This is where it begins," Marcus continued. "A moment that changes everything. That tiny life in her arms isn't just an extension of her. It's the start of something bigger. A legacy, a connection that will ripple through time." Zilara frowned, her analytical mind struggling to reconcile the raw emotion she was witnessing with her own beliefs. And what happens when that child grows, when it inevitably faces pain, loss, or failure? Are these bonds still worth it then? Marcus smiled faintly. Yes, because even in pain, those bonds give us strength. They remind us that we're not alone, that we're part of something greater than ourselves. The scene shifted once more, and they were standing in a sprawling park. Families picnicked on the grass, children played tag, and couples strolled hand in hand. In the distance, an older man was teaching a young boy to fly a kite. The boy's laughter echoed through the air as the kite soared higher. "Do you see the man teaching the child?" Marcus asked, pointing. "That's not the boy's father. He's his grandfather, a generation removed, yet still passing down knowledge, love, and care." Zilara watched the scene with a mix of fascination and unease. "It's inefficient," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why not rely on technology? Artificial incubation. Why tie so much of your survival to these fragile bonds?" Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. "Because it's not just about survival, Zilara. It's about meaning, about creating a world worth surviving in. These bonds, fragile as they may seem, are what make us human." The simulation faded, the chamber returning to its original state. The vibrant earth scenes were gone, but the emotions they had evoked lingered in the air. Zilara stood silently, her glowing eyes fixed on Marcus. For the first time, she didn't have a sharp retort or a mocking smirk. Instead, she looked thoughtful, almost vulnerable. "I still think your methods are flawed," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. "But perhaps there is something I don't fully understand." Marcus smiled, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "That's all I'm asking, Zilara. Just consider the possibility that strength doesn't always come from perfection." She gave him a long, searching look before turning to leave. As she walked away, her steps were slower, her posture less rigid. For the first time, Marcus felt like he wasn't just talking to a skeptic. He was talking to someone who might actually be listening. And for him, that was progress. The human spirit in action. The simulation chamber buzzed faintly as Marcus made his final adjustments. This time, the environment was designed not to showcase Earth's beauty or the tender moments of human connection, but something far more raw. Resilience in the face of chaos. When Zilara arrived, her steps were measured, her expression a blend of curiosity and skepticism. "You've shown me your messy beginnings and your emotional attachments," she said, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "What now, Marcus? Another sentimental display?" "Not this time," Marcus replied, his voice calm but resolute. "Today, I want to show you something different. How those bonds, those so-called weaknesses, become our greatest strength when everything else falls apart." Zilara raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She folded her arms as Marcus activated the simulation. Instantly, the chamber transformed into the ruins of a city. Buildings lay in jagged heaps, their steel skeletons jutting toward a smoke-filled sky. Fires raged in the distance, and the sound of sirens, shouting, and distant explosions filled the air. The ground was littered with debris, and amidst the destruction, human figures moved, some desperately searching, others carrying the injured. Zilara's eyes widened slightly, but her expression remained guarded. "A war zone," she said flatly. "This is what your bonds lead to: destruction." "Keep watching," Marcus said, gesturing toward a small group of humans. A woman, covered in soot and limping, clutched the hand of a crying child. Her eyes were filled with fear, but also determination. She scanned the rubble, shouting a name, her voice hoarse. Moments later, a man appeared, running toward her. He carried another child on his back, their faces streaked with dirt but alive. "They're a family," Marcus explained. "Their home is gone, their world is in chaos, but they're still fighting to stay together, to survive." Zilara tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. Emotion drives them, not logic. What happens when their attachments hold them back? Before Marcus could answer, the scene shifted. The same family stood in a makeshift shelter, joined by others. Supplies were scarce, but they shared what little they had. The father worked alongside strangers to build barricades, while the mother organized food distribution. The children, now calmer, helped carry water to the injured. "This is what happens," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Those bonds grow beyond the family. They ripple outward, creating communities, even in the face of annihilation. It's not perfect, and it's not easy, but it's how we endure." Zilara watched in silence as the scene shifted again. This time, the humans were rebuilding. The city was still scared, but small pockets of hope emerged. A repaired school, a community garden, a gathering of people singing despite the destruction around them. "These people should have fallen apart," Marcus continued. "By your logic, their emotional attachments should have been their downfall. But instead, those attachments gave them the strength to rise again." Zilara turned to him, her expression unreadable. "And what about those who didn't survive? Those whose bonds were severed, what becomes of them?" Marcus paused, his gaze softening. "They grieve, and it's painful. But even in loss, those bonds leave something behind. Memories, lessons, a reason to keep going. That's the human spirit, Zilara. We don't just survive. We rebuild. We grow stronger." The simulation shifted once more, this time to a spacecraft launching into the vastness of space. Humans aboard it worked together, their faces filled with determination. Marcus gestured toward the scene. "This is what our bonds have led to: exploration, innovation, the ability to reach for the stars. Without them, we'd still be fighting for survival on a single planet. It's our imperfections, our connections, that drive us forward." Zilara remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the simulated humans. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Your people are strange, Marcus. Illogical. Yet, there is something compelling about your persistence." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's not just persistence. It's belief in each other, in a future that's better than the past. And that belief is rooted in the very bonds you've dismissed." Zilara turned to face him fully, her glowing eyes searching his. "Perhaps I've been too quick to judge. Your species is far from perfect. But there is strength in your flaws, a kind of strength I didn't expect." Marcus's smile grew. "That's all I wanted to show you." As the simulation faded and the chamber returned to its original state, Zilara stood still, her mind clearly racing with thoughts. For the first time, Marcus felt like the gap between their perspectives had begun to narrow. And for humanity, he thought, that was victory enough. The truth revealed. The observation deck of the galactic research vessel was silent, save for the faint hum of the ship's engines as it drifted through the endless void. Stars glittered outside the massive windows, their cold light illuminating the faces of Marcus and Zilara as they stood side by side. Neither had spoken since leaving the simulation chamber, but the air between them was thick with unspoken words. Finally, Zilara broke the silence. "You've shown me your world, your struggles, your triumphs. I've seen the depth of your species' connections, the resilience you claim stems from your imperfections. But," she hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering slightly, "I still don't understand one thing." Marcus glanced at her, his expression calm but curious. "What's that?" She turned to face him fully, her metallic blue skin catching the starlight. "Why does it matter so much? Why go through all the pain, the inefficiency, the loss? Why not choose a path that eliminates those burdens? My species has thrived by perfecting efficiency, by removing emotion from reproduction. And yet, you cling to this messy, unpredictable process. Why?" Marcus took a deep breath, as if he had been waiting for this question. "Because it's not just about survival, Zilara. It's about living. About creating something that outlasts us, something that carries meaning beyond the individual." He gestured toward the stars outside the window. "Every one of those lights out there is a reminder of how small we are. Alone, a human life is fleeting, insignificant. But together, Through the bonds we form and the lives we create, we leave a mark on the universe. Zilara's expression remained unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. Marcus continued, his voice softening. My grandfather once told me that every act of love, every sacrifice we make for another, is like planting a seed in a garden we may never see. That's what reproduction is for us. It's not just biology. It's hope. It's the belief that, even when we're gone, a part of us will carry on. Zilara looked away, her gaze drifting to the stars. Hope, she repeated, the word foreign on her tongue. Your species clings to something intangible, something that can't be measured or proven. And yet, she paused, her voice faltering for the first time. And yet, I can't deny what I've seen. The strength of your people, their ability to rebuild, to find meaning even in loss. It's strange, illogical, but perhaps it's not entirely without merit. Marcus smiled faintly. That's the closest thing to a compliment I've ever heard from you. Zilara turned back to him, her expression softening in a way Marcus had never seen before. Don't get used to it, human. But she hesitated again, as if the words were difficult to form. You've given me much to think about. Perhaps there's more to your species than I initially believed. Her glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no trace of mockery or disdain. Instead, there was something that almost resembled respect. You laugh at us, Marcus said, his tone light but sincere. But maybe it's because you're afraid to admit there's something you don't fully understand. And that's okay. Understanding takes time. Zilara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. Careful, Marcus. You're beginning to sound like one of those sentimentalists you admire so much. I'll take that as a win, he replied with a chuckle. They stood in silence for a moment longer, the vastness of space stretching before them. Finally, Zilara spoke again, her voice quieter but resolute. Your people are flawed, Marcus. But there's beauty in those flaws, and perhaps strength. Marcus nodded, his smile widening. That's all we've ever tried to show the galaxy, Zilara. That our imperfections are what make us unique. And maybe, just maybe, they're what make us strong. Zilara said nothing more, but as she turned to leave, there was a newfound lightness in her steps. Marcus watched her go, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. He hadn't just won a debate. He had built a bridge between two vastly different worlds. As the stars continued to shimmer outside, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. Humanity's story was far from perfect, but it was theirs. And now, perhaps, Zilara understood that too.